the whole period with Frank, I was carving my teeth, and I'd watch him and hear how he would be very specific about beats and timing and how he would color things. And I remember once I was in the studio and he was mixing something, and it was just him and me, and I'm watching him mix, and then he stops the mix, and he mixes it down to 2 track, and then he stops, and he goes back to the console, and he makes some changes, and then he continues mixing the rest of the song. And then I see him get up and walk over to the 2 track machine, and he takes a razor blade, and he takes the tape, and he puts it on a little splicing block, and I'm like, "What is he doing?" And he cuts the tape, and I'm like, "He cut the tape. You're not supposed to cut the tape," you know? And then he'd skew it. He's like, and I'm so fascinated by this. I'm like, "Oh my God, I didn't know you can do that." And
Yeah.
he say, "Yeah, that's the kick drum right there," you know? And you hear, so, and he'd get right on right spot. He'd mark it, and then he'd cut it, and he glued the pieces together. And I'm thinking, he's not doing. I mean, what is he doing? And then there was that moment where he played it back, and the tape went across the head, and I got it, and I was stunned because this immediately opened up a world of possibilities in my mind, because I always thought, no, you get one shot, you record it, and that's it, and whatever it is, it is. I didn't know about that you can splice tape and stuff like that. That's how innocent and naive I was. And when that happened, I just went, oh, yeah. And Frank just looks at me and smiles and goes, he goes, yep, it makes every day like Christmas. I discovered what editing was, and then because you don't say, "Can you show me what you're doing?" He's like, "No, do this now." It's like he's not. I mean, he would not quite that, but you didn't interrupt him.
Mm.
How did you do that? Well, he would show you certain things, but it would be like this. Okay, now next.
Yeah.
And I remember he gave me a grease pencil, and that's all I needed. When I went home, I bought an editing block, and so this was part of my training that
Right.
then merged into my ability to actually do something like flexible.
Mhm.
But that was big because it opened up everything.
Sure.
And I was living in my little apartment in Fairfax Street, and I would just start recording television anybody that came by. I'd throw parties just so I could record people. I have miles of tape, you know what I mean? And splicing them and editing them and making people say things that were so silly. I just found it fascinating. And then finally, when I saved all my money from the time I was working for Frank, and I put a down payment on a little house in Sylmar that had a tool shed out back that I converted into a studio. And I spent 5 months converting it into a studio. And during that period, I would have my friends and various people living in rooms that would pay rent. So I didn't have to pay rent. I needed $20 a week to buy food. And I was happy. I
Mm.
was no happier then than I am, no happier now than I was then. It was simpler, that's for sure. And I was doing everything I wanted. And I had a studio, and I saved, and I got a quarter-inch Fostex quarter-inch 8-track machine. And Carvin lent me or gave me a board. It was a monitoring board, and I used it as a mixing board.
Right.
And then Frank stepped in, and he saved the day because he loaned me equipment that I would never have the funds or the understanding of even how to use. He let me use this huge AKG reverb. That's what I used on Flexible.
Right.
All the drum machine was on Flexible was I borrowed a drum machine from him
Right.
that he loaned me. He would offer it. You don't ask him if you could borrow something. You get the axe. It's like, but if he saw that you had potential and you needed something, he would give it to you, and he would give me all sorts of things to experiment with. Compressors. I didn't know what a compressor was, you know, EQs. My first, the one piece of quality gear that I purchased in my life back then that was very expensive was a half-inch or quarter-inch 2-track ATR 102 machine,
Right.
tape recorder.
Yeah.
This is a big machine. It's the best.
Yeah.
It was Frank's. He had 2 of them and he sold me one, and it was $5,000. And I borrowed the money from my parents and I paid them back by giving guitar lessons. But that, I still have that machine. Matter of fact, it's in the other room. And that's what I used. I used it on Inviolate.
Wow.
You know, when I mixed to analog. I did when I mixed the, you know, so it's precious to me because it was Frank's. And it was everything. It was the one piece of quality gear. So the other huge epiphany I had was when I had finished building Stucco Blue Studio, which was the conversion of the tool shed, and I got all my ducks in a row. I had a little rack. There's photos of me sitting there in that studio recording. I just went mad recording stuff with very little attention to quality. It was just like, there's a mic, put the mic up, and okay, there's the way I was thinking then, one take, you know, and that's it. That's all you know. And it was, and I started to record Flexible. Now, the music of Flexible, some of it goes way back before that. I mean,
right.
Call It Sleep was a college harmony assignment, you know, and Blood So Loved I composed in high school, you know, and so the music was, I loved writing and I loved composing, never really knowing if I was ever going to be able to hear it or not. So the moment I had my studio, I just wanted to record these things, and I had stacks and stacks of manuscript and paper, and I didn't want to involve anybody because I didn't have the money. I didn't know, all the people I knew were just these monster, you know, musicians, and I wasn't going to get them to come to my little crappy studio and, you know, play something. But I'll never forget when I got Chad Wackerman to come down. He spent about an hour. He said he, you know, would help me to get drum sounds. I've never set up drums or anything, and he offered to help. And I happen to have the music for Junkie and maybe something else. And he was just kind enough to just sight read it, you know, and I couldn't believe I had like a real musician, you know what I mean, playing my music. And of course, it was very influenced by Frank because that's what I was really focused on. When I discovered Frank's music, I was just a teenage rock head, you know, Led Zeppelin, all the Deep Purple and all that. But I was also had a pull to be a composer. So nobody was mixing those things that I knew of. Yeah. And when I heard Frank, that was it, because he was doing all the things that I loved. There was comedy. I mean, one of the first pieces I heard was Electric Aunt Jemima. And when I heard those Munchkin voices, I'm like, oh, somebody's silly, you know? But it had all this incredible musical depth and composition and crazy guitar solos and stories and diversity, unimaginable. Diversity in the flavors of the harmonic structures and the instrumentations. And Frank was a miracle, you know, and I was just right in the middle of it with the front row seat, just watching and observing. So it was impossible for that not to be absorbed into me, because I wanted to do all those same things. I wanted to compose guitar, stories, you know, everything. And when I started doing Flexible, of course, I was, you know, transcribing Zappa music for 5 years and so ensconced in what he was doing, it just bled into my composition in a sense, you know? So I started recording everything and anything, and it sounded like shit. and I gave very little attention to where the mics were going, what the if it was in sync with the drums, you know what I mean? And I sat back finally and I started listening. It was flexible, and I recorded it and I listened to it and I'm like, this sounds like shit. You know what? I'm not gonna. This isn't real. I got to get real. And I dropped an axe, and I started. That's when I started. Well, you've been working with Frank. You see how specific he is. You see the pains he goes through, the overdubbing, the punching, the you're punching through stuff so that musicians play it right, you know. And I think I maybe may have gone a little overboard because I completely re-recorded Flexible, and I was not satisfied unless there was not one flam on the whole record. Melodies, drums, everything, you know, everything. I got very forensic. So that was another huge turning point. It was the moment that I listened to what I had done and just it was like a, you know, people go through moments of clarity. And although you're always evolving and changing, there's like paradigm shifts where you have powerful aha moments.
Yeah.
And you know, I'm outlining some of the ones that I have for me: the editing, the the recognizing that I'm not giving this the attention it needs. I really need to, and then realizing that, wow, if I give this attention, it starts to sound good,
Yeah.
you know? So, and another big epiphany for me was when I was mixing Flexible, I always sort of turned a little bit. I had a tendency, I was a type of person, and perhaps still am to a degree. I turn a blind eye to things that seem intimidatingly complex. Oddly enough, that was never the case with music composition. That I'm like, I get this. I get it, you know. But certain things, I would just go, no, I'm too. I don't have the intelligence for that, or it's too complicated, and I'll screw it up. This is not uncommon. You know, people have this, you know, on certain subjects.
Yeah.
And I had it on many subjects and still do. They're illusory. These are all illusions that we create because if you have an interest in something, that's all you need. You're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
You know, and then there's no A, B, C. You just figure it out because your interest draws you in. And when you have an interest, you also have retention, the ability to remember and to actually log and utilize those things that you're learning. And equalization was one of those things that just, you know, I don't know what the frequencies, 5K, you know, and you hear Frank every day in sound check, he'd go, I need 2 more dB at 3K on the snare drum, you know, and this, it was like an alien language. And I always wanted to know it, but it's not a language that you can fake. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's, I have some funny stories. Maybe not for now, but a friend of mine who worked with a very famous artist was trying to impress people in her rehearsal of knowing, leading them to believe that she understood engineering jargon and was at the microphone going, no more 4K. I mean, and then the engineer's like, you know, 4K is like piercing. That'll bring you to your knees. You know, it makes your eyes cross. And she's like, and it's got its feet, it's going, wee, wee. She's going, no, more 4K, you know. So it's not something you can fake. You
No,
have to know it.
you have to know what you're
And
talking about.
yeah, and it was always intimidating to me until I purchased from Bob Harris this beautiful dual parametric equalizer with knobs for all the frequencies. And it was an alien machine. It just looked alien to me until I said, and Bob said, if you throw this across the stereo bus, this is what people do.
Right.
And I did. And I'm like, well, what is this? You know, okay. And Oh, oh, oh. It was another one of those moments of clarity where I said, that's what 4K is. That's what 50 cycles is. That's what this means. And I wanted to own that so bad. I wanted to know when I heard something, I knew exactly what frequency and how to make it, because this is like surgery to the stereo spectrum, or surgery on any note
It's
if you're
paramount. Yeah.
EQing it. And it's vitally important in coloring the note, in how where the note lives, if you're using your EQ on guitar. So I spent so much time sitting and listening to Flexible and just editing, like, until, oh, that sounds so much better. And then of course you have the bypass switch, and I would put the bypass in, and it was night and day.
Same day, yeah.
Everything changed. So that was another epiphany. So at that point, I felt like I had the tools to start recording music that could at least represent some kind of accessible quality, where others can listen to it and not go, that sounds like a kid in his garage. If you ever saw the master tape for Flexible, there's edits like sometimes they're this big, because I learned from Frank, you can mix a section,
yeah,
and then cut it into a master.
right.
And I only have 8 tracks. And if you listen to the master 8 track, and the 8 track was a 1/4-inch little tiny machine,
Yeah.
And if you listen to the 8 track, there's everything on every track.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It
Yeah.
wasn't laid out like, hey, this is the kick drum track, and this is it was just like, well, I don't have enough tracks now, so I got to rob Peter to pay Paul, and use these tracks. But that's okay, because when I mix it, I can do it in sections, because every day is Christmas. And that's why if you saw the master reel for Flexible, it's just all edits.
Yeah.
But, it's any means necessary. I don't care. There's nothing, there's no, what am I going to do? I did this all in one take. Not
And
that stuff.
yeah,
But I was so happy when I was listening to it. And I'll tell you, Shannon, for me at least, one of the things that allowed me to be that weird, that quirky, that musical, was the fact that I had no expectations for what was going to happen with the music. It was already in my mind. Nobody cares about what I'm doing. I could do whatever I want. Nobody cares. And it's my secret, and I don't care if they care. I want to do it. And like, so that's why I like, when I did the Attitude song, there was just so much excitement, because I thought, oh, harmonies. You mean I can do this? No, and I could bend the bar in harmony. I chopped out the back of the tailpiece of the guitar so I could pull up, and that was the first floating trem. Yeah, you can't buy it's hard to buy a guitar these days without one of those when they have the locking trem, And that was the impetus, was I want to be able to play a melody with the bar, and so that, it's any means necessary. It's innocent. And those are the best ways that things evolve.
Yeah.
So then I had, I still, as an artist, have a lot of diversity in my taste for the kind of things I like to release. A lot of the records are different. You have an orchestra record, you've got a trio record, every artist does that to a degree. But then you have something like the Attitude song, which was like guitar pyrotechnics, which is totally different. And then you have something like the Boy Girl song, or something like that,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I love that diversity. Oh, this song says this,
Yeah.
So it was a real beautiful moment of independence and creativity when I was able to navigate that little studio and had all those epiphanies. And these little epiphanies come to people through life, and they continue.
You can definitely sense that in that album. It really is a special album. That's yeah, I love it. Absolutely love it.
Thank thank you. But after I did Flexible, I I mean, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, there was the Alcatraz. And if you listen to Flexible, you might think, well, this guy, he can either go into a career as a guitar hero or as maybe a singer or as a pop songwriter or as a fusion guy, or you know what I mean? Because that record has little flavor. None of them follow a particular genre specifically,
Yeah.
but there's flavors.
Yeah.
So when I heard Alcatraz was looking for a guitarist, I thought I'm going to pick the guitar flavor. I love the guitar. I know I can play that. I like playing that stuff. And I took that dive, and then the Dave Roth thing came, and okay, now you're a guitar hero. You know what I mean? So, but when it came time to do Passion and Warfare, I started it in Stucco Blue because after Flexible and after I left Frank, my unique musical voice started to arise a little stronger because I started hearing things and wanting to do things that really didn't have much to do with Frank's music, the way Flexible did.
Yeah.
You'll never not hear an artist's inspirations, seeping into something.
Yeah.
I mean, I was listening to Greenish Blues off of Inviolate because somebody said, "Oh, it sounds like Zappa," and I'm like, "Yeah," but I wasn't like I was listening to Frank records and say, "Well, look at me." It becomes part of your DNA.
Of course.
But with Passion and Warfare, I put on the grown up shoes. I just said, "Okay, this is going to sound like a real record. You're going to get real gear. You're going to build a real studio. You're going to write music that's real to you, that's important to you, that doesn't sound like anything else, within reason. And that's what you're going to do." So that was the next paradigm shift for me. And it required everything that came before it. But it was another, we go through life and we tighten our belt a little bit and get a little taller.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I remember listening to it when I was just absolutely floored by the production values on that album. What I liked about it, I mean, I loved the compositions, but I loved the space in it, the way you could hear everything. And when you got distorted guitars, sometimes you can get lost, but you seem to have this clarity.
Yeah, recording techniques were very different back then. First, it was all analog. There was no such thing as digital. And also the console I was using it was a gem. It was an API with the original Jensen transformers in the stereo bus.
Right.
And I didn't even, that was another epiphany, was when I didn't pay close enough attention to the components in the gear you're recording with. I mean, you go to the store, you buy something, this should be good. It's expensive. That's not always the case. You got to do your research and you got to understand what these things sound like. And I just totally seem to have lucked out with Passion and Warfare because that API console was just a gem. And it had all the right elements and everything. And I had the right setup, I had the right speakers, and I was being incredibly forensic. And I wanted that depth. I wanted that dimension. So the gear I was using allowed me to find it. And sometimes you don't even realize what you're doing until it's finished, it's released, and you're listening to it on a CD, or a vinyl. And I would just always remember feeling, this is a good sounding record. There's something about it that sounds really good. And that dawned on me when I had to go out and buy a stereo. I wanted to go out and buy a home stereo. This was kind of a weird coincidence. And I go into this stereo shop and I'm talking to the guy and he's demonstrating stereos, and his demo tape was Passion and Warfare. And he didn't even know I was the guy that made it. And he goes, I always use this CD because it really, and I'm like, oh, really? You know,
Excellent.
and that happened twice, except the second time the guy knew me. And I thought, if these people are using my record as a barometer for displaying and demonstrating their gear, I must have done something right. Then I made a mistake. I changed the console because I met somebody that talked me into putting something different in the stereo bus.
Ah,
And I made Sex and Religion on the same console with some different op amps and stuff like that.
mhm.
And I didn't realize it until the record was out and I listened to it. Well, as I was doing it, there was always something I'm like, this doesn't sound like Passion and Warfare. The audio quality doesn't sound bad, but there's a juice that's missing. There's a space, there's an ambience, there's a brittleness that's there. There's a transparency. And a lot of people like that transparency, but I didn't. I wanted the color. So that was another epiphany moment for me, or a moment of clarity was, and sometimes you don't know until later.
Yeah. Yeah.
So by the time I started on Passion and Warfare, you see, Frank, the last show I did was with Frank was the infamous Palermo, Sicily riots.
Yeah.
And once that happened, Frank, he didn't want to tour anymore. So he fired he let everybody go. And I was the last one that was held on for a little while to finish certain transcriptions. He said, you need to finish up your transcription and then that's it. And I knew that day was coming. But I moved on. I did Alcatraz, and then I did Passion and Warfare. And all through that period, I would still see Frank and go up to the house. I mean, I whenever I could. And it was a stunner when Passion and Warfare came out and it went gold in the first week. So when a record goes gold, you can have a plaque made. And this was like the first person I thought of was, I'm having a plaque made for Frank. And I'll never forget, I brought it up to the house and I gave it to him. And this was when he I believe if I'm, he was diagnosed at this point, and I sat with him and I handed it to him in some memory of Frank Zappa for 500,000 units sold. And he looked at it and he went, oh boy, good work, sport. I'm so happy. I love talking about Frank to people who are really interested, and not just what was it like working for Frank Zappa? I mean, I get asked that question almost every interview for my whole life, but but the people that Frank's music has touched, as you know, you can't verbalize that.
No.
It's a club. And I just happened to have a ringside seat, and I could only imagine what it, would be like if I could hear antidotes and from somebody that was there.
Mhm.
So that's why I love doing this, because I know how interesting it could be for some people.
Yeah, it is.
And I love that you're doing it too.
That's great.
And let's do more, but I
Fantastic.
gotta go now.
Yeah, no, problem, Steve. Again, thank you so much. And
Got it, brother.
see you soon.